The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD is a video game for the Nintendo Wii that released in July of 2021, this year. This is sort of a late, early impressions video, but I wanted to give my early initial thoughts on this, as I've frankly only played 5 hours of this game. Now, I played Skyward Sword back on the Wii and loved it. However, upon replaying it, I definitely noticed some of the blemishes to the game. You know, the pacing was often very uneven. Some of the boss designs were really good, while others were very meh. And, of course, there's Fi, who just will not shut her yap. However, with all that to say, Skyward Sword always did have a lot going for it too. It had a very strong narrative for a Zelda game, as well as some brilliant and intricately designed dungeons. So I just wanted to say, right off the bat, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD does a lot to even out, sort of hide some of those original blemishes of the original game. That's to say, it's still not perfect. And I want to give my thoughts on this game. So, right off the bat, the opening of this game is very exposition heavy. Now, I understand they really want to set it up as being a more intimate Zelda game, you know, Link and Zelda's relationship, and there's parts of that I really do like. However, there's also a lot of other side characters, many of whom you feel like, are they really going to come into play later in the game, and they just sort of dump a lot of exposition on you. That and the fact that while much of the narrative in the opening tutorial sections were tightened up a bit, making parts of them optional, it's still hard not to say it doesn't feel like a slog. As in, you do go from cutscene to cutscene right after another. And when I went back to replay this game after playing more than 700 hours of Breath of the Wild, because obviously that's a game I like a lot, which is a bit of an understatement, I freaking love it, but going back to this one, with its much slower both narrative and even the gameplay at first, like the motion controls, while interesting, they just felt slower, like, and I sort of questioned myself, you know, if this game had really aged all that well initially, and after the opening section, after finally getting past all the exposition stuff, I kind of put this game down, and I didn't really touch it for a few weeks. I kind of, you know, just went back to playing Breath of the Wild and Monster Hunter Rise and Mario Odyssey and, you know, all those other great games that I played so much on my Switch. But then I decided to take it over when I was at my nephew's house and picked it up again. And as soon as I got to Flawed Woods, something just clicked. My memory kind of clicked. I forgot just how much fun it is just to run around Flawed Woods. How much fun it is to just cut grass. And I remembered that, you know, yeah, while the combat is a little bit slower, it is a little more methodical. And once I finally got to take out my first Baba in Bokoblin, I remembered how much fun the combat can be. It's not perfect by any means. The swordplay is not one-on-one, but there's undeniably something satisfying about landing a blow against one of these enemies and delivering a mortal draw. Now, this game, to its credit, makes the motion controls mostly optional. I played a little bit with the motion controls, and while they're still cool, I want to emphasize that I play the motion controls with the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con controllers. I do have the Skyward Sword Joy-Con controllers. No. I spent most of my time since playing, you know, just with the more standard normal controller mode. And I have to say, it mostly works pretty well. You know, the motion control buttons are really mapped just to this bottom right button on the control stick right here. You're able to swing Link's sword, you know, mostly the same as you would with a Joy-Con or Wii remote. That said, it's still not perfect, and it does look a little weird sometimes, and there are some gestures that are much harder to pull off, funnily enough, with this mode, like the fatal blow. That said, there are some gestures that are frankly a lot easier to pull off than they were with the original motion control setup, such as the stab move. And also, I feel like using, you know, projectile weapons such as a slingshot is also, in many ways, much easier than it was with just plain old motion controls. The thing that is undeniably easier is using your loft wing. Like, I never really particularly liked using the motion controls for the loft ring. Now you can just use the regular control sticks to steer. And some of the button mapping can feel a little weird at first, but once it clicks, and it's definitely clicked for me. Now, along with that, this game is much more linear than other Zelda games. However, there are downsides and upsides to that. The downsides is that it's very bound. You're going from point A to point B progression, and due to the structure of the game, I've definitely started to notice it has some more repetitive notes that, because of its linearity, definitely can start to feel a little more, repetitive, a little bit faster. You don't have really any option to do any dungeons or any story quest or anything regarding the main game really out of order. There's a few side quests you can do here and there, take a break, but even then, they're still mainly only available when the game says they are. Which is a little bit, rough to go back to after playing so much Breath of the Wild, which is pretty much the definition of pure open world gameplay. And going back to this game, it's different. There are upsides to this, however, in that many of the locations, definitely they all get their time to shine. Like Faron Woods, for instance, it is so much fun just to run around this forest. Even though the gameplay structure itself is fairly linear, in a weird way, Faron Woods, actually, as a self-contained, isolated area, I just remembered how much fun I had just running around to it, listening to the whimsical music, and just, seeing the fun, kooky characters, and, sort of experimenting with the combat with some of the Dekobabas and Bokoblins. That, in the main hub area of the game, the town of Skyloft, which is the starting point of the game, once you get past the tutorial, it really opens up, and just roaming around Skyloft is so much fun. Like, I actually spent quite a lot of time yesterday, and even a little today, just running around Skyloft, doing random things, seeing what I could buy, going to sort of the plaza, the shop, and just the whole 9 yards. It's a really fun town, and it's a contender for one of my favorite towns in Zelda games, if not video games in general. It's a fun town. It's a fun environment. It's above the sky. It's cool. However, the sky itself is very, very disappointing. Flying around on the loft ring in little bursts can be fun, but there's just really nothing to do or just really seeing the sky. There's a floating rock and another floating rock. There's a few little flying Octorok shooting stuff at you. There's a few other islands with mini games, and there's like a tavern that sits on an island called the Lumpy Pumpkin, which I think is pretty cute. But other than that, there's just really nothing there. Again, it feels more like a glorified hub world. And yeah, one could say the same for like most overworlds in Zelda games, Hyrule Field and Ocarina of Time being a big example, and even to some extent the Great Sea and Wind Waker. The difference is the developers were able to sort of very brilliantly mask that by making them so sprawling and, larger than life feeling. So they were able to sort of hide the fact that they were glorified hub worlds, at least for their time, with that sort of brilliant design and making you feel like you were sort of on that epic adventure. Here with the sky, you don't really get that. And once you get off the sky and down to the main surface, it's a very bound experience, and the different sections of the game definitely feel a lot more broken up and less seamless than they do in most other Zelda games before and since. Visually speaking, this game looks good. I always thought it looked good. I've always been a fan of this game's art style. It always looks nice. I think it obviously definitely looks a little nicer now that the HD touch-ups are in place. I don't actually think it looks that better. However, there's definitely a depth of field that definitely you could not get on the Wii, and I feel like many of the colors are much brighter, and you can really appreciate sort of what the developers are going for with the art style. Again, this was very much a precursor to the very beautiful anime-inspired Breath of the Wild art style. But, with that to say, now that everything is high definition and things are much crisper and cleaner, you also see some of the blemishes. Many of the textures do look a little bit more dated now that you see it in HD, and some of the models, character and enemy models, definitely look a lot more simplistic than you'd expect from a modern Nintendo game. With that to say, I still think it looks pretty good. The one area where this game really does kill it is the soundtrack. I love the soundtrack to this game. As annoying as Fi was and always is and shall be, her theme song is beautiful. Like, it literally brings a tear to my eye. It's one of my favorite music compositions in video games, period. Speaking of Fi, she's definitely been toned down a little bit. She could still be, you know, a little annoying at first and a little intrusive at times, but they definitely brushed her up. She's much more optional, and she doesn't jump around every 5 minutes to tell you something that you could use common sense and, you know, gamer logic to already figure out. So, good on the developers for making slight baby step improvements. Overall, Skyward Sword HD, while it's still a very flawed game, it's still a good game. It's a gem. A flawed gem, but a gem nonetheless. And while I wasn't so sure at first when I played this game, given the slog of a tutorial, once I really got into the beef of this game in Flawed Woods, it's clicked with me. And I can definitely say, with fairly good assurance, this is definitely a Zelda game worth experiencing if you've never played it before. I personally would recommend playing it in small doses because of its linearity. There can be a bit of the repetitions can start to feel a little old, a little faster. But, you know, playing it for like an hour at a time can still be a lot of fun. And I do very much enjoy this game to this day. And while I am hesitant to say that this is one of my more preferred Zelda games, I definitely wouldn't place it on my top 3. Like, it's not like an Ocarina of Time or Breath of the Wild or Twilight Princess or anything like that. You know, my thoughts have started to shift back on this game. It started to regrow on me, you could say. And I'm only 5 hours into this game. I haven't even got to the first dungeon, but I can definitely safely say, yeah, mechanically, it's a good game. It's not perfect by any means, but it works, and it's fun. You know, if you want a little bit more methodology to some of the combat, if you want a little more of a dungeon-based, story-driven Zelda game, I think you should check this one out. I would like to give a full review of this game once I finally finish it, which will probably not be for a while. Again, I did finish it back on the Wii, so I know everything that happens, but, you know, gotta have that, you know, reviewer's honesty there, I guess. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think of The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD? And with that out of the way, I'm gonna go eat some beef stew.